Hey folks, Steve here with another All Green Alike video. This is my initial impressions for the system, as well as a post-mortem for the attack, or well, I should say, Across the Potomac scenario, the basic learning scenario from Stonewall Jackson's Way 2, All Green Alike module. I wanted to kind of move some of this conversation to a distinct video, so it's kind of separate and folks could listen to it or watch it without having me drag through the gameplay itself. The scenario ended in a Union substantive victory almost entirely because Jackson got surrounded and really got walloped to the point that he could really only try to defend, and he just never got any relief to recover enough that he could try to push back. And what's funny is how resilient even a few manpower can be as a stack. Even when an attacker gets a bunch of bonuses, like there's a limit to those bonuses at some point, and the die rolls could still be pretty beneficial where, at best you're continuing to repulse a small manpower unit rather than destroy it outright, or it feels like it's a lot harder to get to that point where you can eliminate it. You really have to pile on a lot of bonuses to actually get to that attrition rate that you're going to totally annihilate somebody. So that's kind of interesting, unless you get some really good die rolls. It's interesting to think about that. I think this scenario is actually really, really good for teaching the basic systems. Understanding that, a campaign game has a lot of different considerations and bigger scale thinking on what you're trying to do. But this does show some really good push and pull. It's very illustrative of the impact that your movement die rolls can have on the game, right? Like who gets where first, the approach to battle kind of situation that you could see in other games where, yeah, if the Union's lagging behind, then we're going to start much further north than if we really got a run in and got our momentum going to get down further south. And then, Johnston's forces have to kind of really push back. As they rush to try to get ahead, you start to see those implications. And then even in the combat, the fact that generally the rebels can make headway by putting Johnston in place with a good tactical rating, and shift kind of what's happening based on that alone. That the rebel tactical advantages in the scenario can really give them a really strong punch. And if there was any, I don't know if it was a mistake, because I certainly tried to do it where it made sense, but I think where the rebels, can be fighting and just shutting down the Union forces by bringing them to a high fatigue level can help, right? The Union can't advance if they're too busy recovering from fatigue from getting walloped in at least one good shot, and that can really, really slow things down. The fact that the U.S. forces managed to get a couple back-to-back activations and really like went after it. Basically, you could interpret this as catching Jackson sleeping and walloped him really good. Just put a wholly different flavor on the scenario at that point, because they had made a really solid gain to what was basically Jefferson County. And by comparison, there was a lot less pressure that we had to push in Berkeley. And because of that, the rebels had to adapt a bit, and I probably didn't do it right. I should have, from the get-go, known I should have been sending somebody up through here. But even if I had dedicated a couple brigades to get to Jackson, I'm not sure it would have been enough. I think, as far as they could have gotten, wouldn't have been enough for the situation that Jackson found himself in. Maybe that could have been stopped by me really letting Jackson retreat a lot. So, I guess that's one of those situations where Jackson's operating really independently. Maybe I shouldn't have let that happen. I had to cover something over here, but he was operating alone effectively. And in a brigade like that, all it took was one string of Union activations, and he was doomed. So, lesson learned certainly from that perspective. and everything else kind of collapsed from there. But I was really, again, really impressed with the situation where, yeah, if you can get a good die roll differential, the rebels could still counterattack, and it's possible, though it didn't happen, that if maybe some die rolls went a little bit differently, we actually could have, pushed the Union back out that way, rendered them weakened, and then pivoted, crossed the river, and swung down maybe, and forced the U.S. out of the blue victory locations there, and shifted the victory situation a lot. Um, the fact that the Union generally had good success in the combats and had done more manpower losses to the South is certainly not great for their situation, for the rebel situation. You would maybe think it would be the other way around, but in this particular scenario, the Union just managed to perform well enough, better than history, that they really blunted the rebel forces here severely. And I mean, if I really wanted to try to push it, I could have kept going, and I could have set up something here where this guy came around, attacked here, maybe forced those guys out, and done even more damage to this force. So like the need to retreat, to pull back units in a campaign context would certainly present itself there. We're like, okay, this is clearly not going well. Let's try to pull back and figure out what else we can do. But there's not a lot of bandwidth to do that in this very short scenario. The other thing that surprised me is how very easy it is to avoid taking additional manpower losses on the retreat, even when you're surrounded by Zocs. And that's, if I read the retreat chart correctly, there's we got a lot of these results where there's that dot, and the dot says you use the left number, which is 0 as compared to 1 in some of these cases. If the retreat en route is along a road, pike, or trail, okay, that's or into a friendly occupied hex. So a lot of what would happen is, you'd have a surrounded unit, but that when it came time to retreat, they could retreat along these roads. And so while in a lot of other war games, if you cause the enemy to retreat through a Zoc, they're going to take an extra step loss, or they're going to take something. Well, in this game, as long as there's a road there, and in this part of the map, there's roads just about everywhere. You couldn't quite finish somebody off. Like, you couldn't quite, if you could do 2 manpower losses, that's great. And if you could get a third one for that retreating through a Zoc, you just really cracked somebody. But I couldn't even get that. So at best, I could get 1 manpower loss. There was always a road somebody could retreat out with. In every case that it mattered, because the roads are so interconnected here, that it just never really got to the point where you were about to completely smash a force, which, is probably appropriate for the era and the situation. But so that, I guess what I'm understanding and adapting to is that the forces on the map generally have a lot more staying power than I might have even have thought. I mean, I assumed some to some degree, but even a couple manpower can still be dangerous, and it's really hard to completely knock out a force. Like, you've really got to hit it several times to really take out a brigade. It takes a lot of effort, it seems like, to really shut the whole force down. But over time, you can be chipping away, where if one side is not taking very many manpower losses and the other is, eventually you're just, that outnumbered force can never go on the attack. It's just not going to make a threshold difference to shift the momentum. And all that feels really good. That is a good system. I think I struggled a little bit at first, just trying to make sure I understood, and maybe this will always be the complication in my mind, of all the different states a unit can be in. Because you have fatigue, which goes up and down, 0 to 4, and you can kind of have a pretty good idea of that. That's really like activations, like how many how many activations does that unit have left, and combat can make it go to 4, in which case it has none left, right? So fatigue, I don't even know if fatigue's the right word, but if a different term was used, I might prefer that, because there's other words that are like fatigue, like exhaustion, that are different. And that, to me, that's a little confusing, and I wish it weren't so, but I can look at it and go, well, I know what fatigue really means in game contexts. But then you have, so like fatigue, okay, you put that on a shelf. Then you do have exhausted, and then you have demoralized, and then you have demoralized, okay, exhausted, demoralized, disorganized, varying levels of fatigue, and then maybe that's it, but and maybe that's not that many, but it feels so weird to be like, okay, right now Jackson is both he is exhausted, he is demoralized, and he's disorganized. And that's a lot of different states to be piling onto a unit, where I guess in many other games, like maybe you have a disorganized, like in OCS, maybe you have disordered, or there's a couple different flavors of like, okay, they're clearly less combat effective. In this game, there's multiple different axes that all interrelate, and the other thing is trying to connect that to what does that mean in a game sense, right? So demoralization is like, okay, they don't have access to artillery, and they're halved on attack. That's fair. You can also go to demoralized 2, which means they're really, really got no attack power, which is pretty bad. So you can kind of get your head wrapped around that is a modifier to their attack combat. Meaning if you're demoralized, you're less likely to perform well on the attack. You can still defend. Disorganized means that you're not generally as combat effective as you could be for the manpower that you have. So I suppose that is a logically different thing. Your morale is different than how organized you are. You could, in theory, be very disorganized, but your morale is rock steady. So you're ready to rock and roll. You're just not doing it efficiently. All right, that does kind of make sense to me. And then this exhausted status, which is just being flipped, is a little odd. And as best as I can tell, the only real game effect of it is like you want to avoid being exhausted. But once you are exhausted, I tried doing a control F in the rules to try to figure out like, what am I missing something? It feels like it only matters because it triggers the extended movement more frequently, right? And so let's see if I can find it here. The rule, and this that's the thing that kind of makes this tough. Like I'm wanting to do it right, but then not quite understanding the impacts of doing the thing that we're talking about doing. So if you're exhausted and you go to fatigue 2 rather than fatigue 3 or 4, so there's a increased threshold of triggering extended march. And again, it's like the terminology is so close to other terminology within the game that it, trying to make sure you got it right. I have it right in my head, but I'm like, gosh, some of this is just a little topsy-turvy. Like, okay, you're exhausted, which means it's going to be easier to trigger an extended movement as part of your movement, which could lead to becoming disorganized and or losing manpower. So being exhausted maybe isn't that big a deal if you're willing to sustain additional chance of manpower loss. And then in addition to extended movement, which is triggered based on how fatigued you are, you also have forced march, which is entirely different, that causes disorganization and potentially manpower loss. And even though I have it all straight in my head, like I understand how to implement the rules and I understand these game states and modes of operation in relation to one another, it feels oddly complex. And I don't know if it, like, is this really the right way to have done this? I don't know. It does work. I mean, it does work. Don't get me wrong. I'm not criticizing the game because I think like it's too complicated or it's too complex. It's fine, but it does seem odd that we would call these mechanics by the names that they've been given because it could be misunderstood for other things that are very similarly named but are really logically distinct. So that depth of how screwed that unit is could be again on multiple axes of screwed. You are exhausted, you are disorganized, and you have no morale. Your energy levels are depleted. Your spirit has been broken, and you can't find your musket, and you're in a world of hurt when your enemy comes bearing down on you, who is organized, who is not demoralized, um, and has enough fatigue that it can go a round or two with you. Then yeah, I mean that's a significant effect in the game, and that's good. That is an absolutely good thing. It is a fidelity level that I appreciate, and you do get a very different sense of like what are the combat results right now, like what has happened, what is this game state. Johnston's marching up the pike, and his forces are disorganized because they're in such a forced march rush to get to the front, and then as they're duking it out, they're being brought to exhaustion. Jackson is demoralized because he just got his butt whooped real bad, and he's got to fall back. He's got no support. I mean, there's a very clear sort of narrative description of what these things mean, which I do really appreciate. Just the naming conventions are odd. Odd in the same way that like hip shots are called hip shots in OCS, and disorganized uses a DG marker rather than a DO marker. Like just weird, just these little weird design decisions, or back when the game was originally designed way back, the terminology that was selected just feels like we could be using more distinct terms, but all that's water under the bridge. I did enjoy this scenario. I think it's a nice, interesting little puzzle, even solitaire, just figuring out like what makes sense to try to do. Maybe Johnston should have been, leader transferring more and just trying to grab what guys he can and just wall up guys where he can. And we didn't succeed in doing that. Knowing that I've gotten such a good victory with the Union, with the U.S., where I think the historical situation was that they didn't necessarily succeed. I'd have to go look at the module notes on this. But I'm reasonably confident that this would have been a historical Confederate victory. It's just let me see here. Let's see. Da, 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 da. Yeah, I don't know. I'm trying to look here in the notes, and I don't know. It's really hard to say who historically won based on just those play notes. It sounds like I don't know. I'm gonna have to look at that some more. I don't want to waste your time, Him and Han in the books here. But what was this actual historical scenario a victory one way or the other? It's hard for me to tell. But I do get the sense that it certainly could have gone the Rebels' way if not for a string of that luck. Again, a little worrisome. Hey, maybe a string of luck just completely throws a game, and that's any war game, I guess. So I'm not harshing on it. Anyway, initial impressions generally to wrap this up. Good. I think this is a nice system. It does a lot of interesting things. I do think the way the rule book is kind of set out requires some diligence to make sure you understand like what is this rule really trying to say. Some people have said like, oh, these rules are just they're just the best written rules ever, and I say they're fine. Maybe it's a formatting thing for me, but I find myself really like having to focus on the paragraph that's set out and going like, okay, where's that word but in here? Or, you know, the adverse, that exception case is buried in that paragraph. Let me make sure I get it. But it is generally good, and the initial impressions are positive. What I want to do next is set up a battle scenario before I jump into the campaign. So an end to innocence scenario 4, which I believe is meant to be the Battle of Bull Run, first Bull Run. It's only 1 turn long, which means that rather than this scenario being kind of, you know, narrow in scope and a few turns long, that one I believe is much wider in scope. There's a fair number of other units on the board, and it's all about fighting the battle, which should give a different experience and get me some good priming for the map location of First Bull Run, so that when I do the Virginia campaign, I should have a better sense of, you know, the context of the map and what I should be looking to do in the campaign game. So an End to Innocence will be coming up here soon, maybe later this week. We'll get those videos up, and then we'll be taking a swing at the Virginia campaign very, very soon. So I hope this video was interesting to you. Let me know what you think down in the comment section below. If you've played this scenario before, it'd be interesting to hear your thoughts on how you've played it out. This is also a good place to kind of enlighten me on the nuances of GCACW. If there are things that I said in this video that maybe you don't agree with, or you know, you might agree or disagree on the terminology bits that I have. That's really more rough edges than anything. And like I said, I do have the rules in my head, you know, pretty well worked out. I understand how the pulleys and levers work. And it's been good. So anyway, yeah, let's wrap this thing up. Thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed the video. Keep an eye out for the next set coming very soon. Take care. Keep on game.